Reactions continue to pour in following U.S. strikes against Iranian-backed militias on Iraqi soil. Iraq is condemning the U.S. and warns of potentially disastrous consequences. This video shows the aftermath of an attack in Iraq. The U.S. launched major strikes on more than 85 targets there and in Syria. The attacks are in retaliation to last weekend's attack in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. troops. U.S. President Joe Biden's defense secretary vowed, quote, "This is the start of our response." Now, for more on all this, let's turn to CBC's Chris Reyes at UN headquarters in New York. Chris, always good to see you. What more do we know about this?
Hi, Chris. Well, a few things are unfolding this morning following those strikes last night. An official statement from the Iraqi government claiming that 16 people were killed, that residential buildings were damaged. The U.S. envoy in Baghdad has been summoned by the Iraqi Foreign Ministry to deliver a note of protest against the attack. Syria's government has also responded on social media, calling the strikes a dangerous escalation. Both countries are pointing the finger at the U.S. for inflaming conflict and violating their sovereignty. Now, on the part of the U.S., Chris, a bit quieter today after a flurry of official statements last night after those strikes hits, which happened at about 4 p.m. Eastern time. I think this morning, the big question is what's coming next? What we got from all those statements from Biden and officials in his administration, and as you also mentioned, coming from Lloyd Austin, the defense secretary, is that yesterday's strikes are the beginning of a response, not the end. And so far, here's what we know from yesterday's strikes, that military forces hit 7 facilities, 85 targets in total in Syria and Iraq using long-range bombers, smart weapons capable of precise target hits. And we know that the purpose of the attack was to degrade the capabilities of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard and other Iranian-backed militia. And that's why what we saw were hits essentially on their supply lines, command and operation centers, weapons storages. John Kirby, who is the national spokesperson, the national security spokesperson, he gave an extensive briefing to the media last night. He said the strikes were a success, and he also said that the U.S. is confident that the targets that were hit were, in fact, connected to the attacks on Americans that you mentioned from last week in Jordan that killed 3 U.S. soldiers.
You were just reporting this is just the beginning, the U.S. is saying, and already Syria and Iraq saying that this is a dangerous escalation. So, of course, the concern then becomes, where does this go from here? What are analysts saying on that front?
That's right, Chris. I mean, these strikes add yet another exclamation mark to all the warnings that we've been hearing. And that is, beware of a spillover effect from Israel's war with Hamas following the October 7th attacks. It's a tinderbox situation right now in the Middle East. It's been one dangerous flare after another, as we've been reporting. Let's read what President Biden said last night. He issued a statement. We know that last night he was in his home in Delaware. He said in that statement that the United States does not seek conflict in the Middle East or anywhere else in the world, but let all those who might seek to do us harm know this: if you harm an American, we will respond. Now, have a listen to one analyst about why he's concerned about the way things are going in the region. Malcolm Davis is with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute.
I think that we need to be cautious about an assumption that somehow escalation is not going to happen. It could very well happen. We could end up in a regional war, and we have to be ready for that possibility. It takes the hit out to a certain degree, but the problem then is that Hamas still exists, still maintains much of its capability. I don't for a minute believe they're going to surrender all the hostages.
And you know, Chris, when it comes to escalation of conflict in the region, it feels like 1 step forward, 2 steps back. There are messages being sent through media from both sides. For example, an Iraqi official just came out saying that the target hits had no fighters or military personnel, and that Iraq doesn't want to escalate tensions. We also heard from John Kirby that the U.S. informed Iraq that the strikes were coming. But of course, adding complication to all of this is the fact that the U.S. and its allies are fighting groups that are widely known to be backed by Iran. So as much as the U.S. is saying we don't want to escalate conflict, we're not at war with Iran, we have no plans of striking Iran, this confrontation is happening, albeit indirectly, between the U.S. and all of these other powers in the region.
A tense time indeed. Chris Reyes reporting live for us in New York. Thank you, Chris.
Thanks.
Now, for more, we spoke earlier to Fawaz Gergis. He is a professor of international relations at the London School of Economics, and he gave us his reaction to these airstrikes from the United States.
If you ask me, will the American attacks degrade the military capabilities of the armed groups in Iraq and Syria? My answer would be in the affirmative, yes. But the bigger question, will the American attacks re-establish deterrence? Will President Biden succeed in convincing, in deterring groups in Yemen, in Iraq and Syria not to attack American bases, not to attack the commercial ships in the Red Sea? I doubt it very much. I think what President Biden has tried to do is to walk a fine line between retaliation on the one hand and avoiding escalation. I expect more escalation in the next few days and few weeks, sadly, for everyone concerned in the region.
That was Fawaz Gergis. He is a professor of international relations at the London School of Economics and Political Science.